Yes, I had been foiled. Happening to glance towards the door in the course of my furtive vigil, I saw, curling into the room along the floor, under the bottom of the door, a thin, dirty, greyish-brown wisp. It suddenly billowed up in a wriggling hump and began to squirm its way towards Mrs. Nevinson's bed. I heard Rayburn shout, "Oh, Jesus God, look! Look what's happening!" It was too late. The thing had vanished into the gloom under Mrs. Nevinson's bed, and at once Mrs. Nevinson began to stir and sigh in her sleep. With a groan, I realized that I had been a fool to shift the bed so near to the door. Even though the door had been shut and locked, there was no flame before it to act as protection. And this was the result. It was another terrible moment in the story of my bones and my flute. In the midst of my confusion and disappointment, I thought of another device that might, even at this stage, save the situation. Mrs. Nevinson had begun to toss in earnest now, so I knew that there was no time to be lost. Bending, I slipped my hands quickly under Jessie's sleeping form and lifted her off the bed. She moaned softly, but I took no heed. Moving to the door, I managed, in spite of my burden, to get the key turned after a moment's fumbling. The knob did not give any trouble, and in a second I was out of the room and hurrying across the sitting room. I stumbled into a chair and knocked over the bookstand with the magazines before I got to the door that gave into the dining room. Into the dining room, into the pantry, and on to the veranda I hurried. At any instant I expected to feel some furry arm arrest my progress. At any instant I was certain I would hear an angry, scrabbling snarl of rage beside me in the dark. Rayburn and Mr. Nevinson stared at me as I approached, but unheeding, I placed the sleeping girl in the hammock and heaved a breath not so much of relief as of sheer desperation and excitement. Mr. Nevinson spoke. "What have you brought her out here for, Milton?" "She'll be safer here," I gasped. I pointed shakily to the window. "When it leaves Mrs. Nevy, it will try to wriggle across and get into Jessie. The flames at the window ought to stop it. We'll see. Got to try something. Can't just resign ourselves and let it do its worst." Without waiting for any argument, I hopped up onto the window-sill and returned to the room. In there I watched Mrs. Nevinson in the final frenzy of her nightmare. As her writhings and heavings grew animated to such a degree that I knew that they were about to cease, I turned quickly and said, "Be on the lookout there, Mr. Nevy. Rayburn, stay where you are. Don't move. If those candles threaten to go right out, light the waste at once. Watch the candles carefully. Don't take your eyes off them 1/2 a second." "Yes, sir. Watching them good," said Rayburn, a breathlessness in his voice. "Hadn't you better come out here, Milton?" Mr. Nevinson said tentatively. "We may need your help," I replied. "I want to see what happens in here." I broke off and glanced at Mrs. Nevinson, who had just given a gasp and grown still. She sighed, opened her eyes, looked at me and said, "What are you doing in here, Milton?" "It was that nightmare again." She spoke in a weary, indifferent voice, then turned over and lay still. I darted to the bed and shook her shoulder. "Don't go to sleep again, Mrs. Nevy. Wake up, quick! Get out of bed!" Even as I touched her, I heard a slight sound under the bed, a faint scratching or scraping. I shook her again, then backed away with a cry. Leisurely and with its foul, wreathing squirm, the shadow mist was seeping from under the bed. A monstrous, dirty cloud, it curled and humped its way past my ankles, while cold and hot shudders moved through my body. The stench that rose around me sent me reeling. I began to cough and groan. I could hear alarmed gasps and exclamations from Mr. Nevinson and Rayburn. Rayburn bawled out at me to get out of the room quickly. Both of them began to call out stammered advice. Unheeding, I turned again to Mrs. Nevinson. I shook her, shouting at her to wake, but to no avail. She lay there without stirring. I have never known such utter frustration as I knew in that moment. I heard Mr. Nevinson calling at me to look out. Be careful, it was coming at me. Get out of the way, run to the window quickly. Rayburn told me to get to the door. It was circling after me, he said. Quick, Mr. Woosley, quick! In a dazed way, I perceived that it would be hopeless to try again to rouse Mrs. Nevinson. This was no sleep, I realized. In that desperate instant, I remembered how, during our discussions the day before, we had asked her why it was that, even though I had revealed what I had witnessed in the room here, she was never curious after waking from her nightmare to watch that shadow mass wriggle its way across the room to Jessie. Surely she should have wanted to verify the phenomenon for herself. But she had replied that she always felt too tired and immediately fell asleep again. It was no sleep, though. It was a sort of coma, and Jessie was in a similar plight. That was why she had not awakened when I lifted her from the bed and took her out to the veranda. Even at this instant I knew she was still unconscious in the hammock where I had put her. This went through my head in a crackling whirl, and it was not until I became aware of a thundering that seemed to occur right at my feet that I understood the reason for the urgent warnings from Mr. Nevinson and Rayburn. I glanced down to see a thin cloud circling slowly about me, grey and weird and menacing. I have often read of people being paralyzed with fear or paralyzed from sheer horror. I don't doubt that such a thing may be possible, but all I can say is that so far as I myself am concerned, my first impulse on seeing that thing was to leap from the spot with all the energy at my disposal. And my muscles did not fail me. I did leap. I leapt away and hurled myself across the room in blind panic, heading for the window at which Rayburn stood on guard. But even as I was in the act of hopping onto the sill, there was an eruption. I found myself jerked backward and sprawling on the floor. I rose only to feel something soft and repulsively clammy charge into me and send me stumbling farther back into the room. The horrible realization came upon me that I was trapped. I was being prevented from leaving the room, a fellow prisoner of a misty fiend. I stood still, panting and staring round, searching for the evil shadow thing, but it was nowhere in view now. Through what seemed like a gauze-like barrier, I became conscious of the gestures and voices of my host and Rayburn. They were beckoning to me and calling me to the windows. I heard Mr. Nevinson say something to the effect that it had gone under the bed again, to hurry. Rayburn was offering to grip my hands and help me over the sill. I rushed towards Rayburn's window again. Mr. Nevinson had crossed over to join Rayburn by the time I got there. I put out my hand to grasp Rayburn's, but the room behind me vibrated, and I pitched backward. The stench, which for some reason unknown had abated considerably during the past minute or two, swirled into renewed activity with an augmented density. My stomach heaved as I stumbled to my feet again. Mr. Nevinson and Rayburn were both advising me to make another rush for the window. "The westerly window!" Mr. Nevinson shouted, and I saw him and Rayburn appear at the westerly window, the one that it was Mr. Nevinson's duty to guard. Almost croaking from fright and bewilderment, I shook my head and waved them back to my window, the window I had been guarding before entering the room, for I saw the candles dimming there, wavering and reaching out towards the veranda. "Hurry back there! Quick! Light the west if the candles go out! Don't move from there!" Then I saw it. Yes, I actually saw it in action. It was swirling up from the floor and hovering with a baffled shrinking and convoluted squirm before the open window where the candle flames strained away from it. I saw something else too. It began to take shape. For a dizzying second I had a glimpse of a dim, revolting, squat head punctured with two oval patches of an incredibly pure lapis lazuli, a perverted apology for eyes. Shape ended here, and the sickly, greyish-brown mist trailed and then looped itself over the vague travesty of a head, which vanished as the whole mass disintegrated to the accompaniment of a deep thumping in mid-air. phenomenon kept me standing there numbed with a peculiar wonder. In that instant fear left me, and I was jolted by a feeling of heightened consciousness that approached elation. I had the sensation of being witness to something cosmic. But there was no time for reflection. The thing had materialized again. I saw it after its violent disintegration, wreathing itself into being once more. Near the dressing table, it began to move in my direction, wriggling and humping itself in its usual grotesque fashion. This was another terrible moment in the story of my bones and my flute.